So as we continue on in our story of Moses, last we left Moses. If you remember, he had chosen the long, hard path. He had chosen poorly, but God was faithful. We found Moses, and he had settled in Midian. He had gotten married, and now we pick up the story. It's 40 years later, and as the verses you just read, the Hebrews were crying out. Pharaoh continued to abuse them for 40 years. He's in Midian. Life's going pretty well, but his people, God's people, are still being abused. They cried out, and God heard. Exodus chapter 3, verse 1 and following. Meanwhile, Moses was shepherding the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire within a bush. As Moses looked, he saw the bush was on fire, but was not being consumed. So Moses thought, I must go over and look at this remarkable sight. Why isn't the bush burning up? And immediately we need to pause, because when we pause, we understand it's been 40 years. As we talked about last week, Moses kind of opted for the longer, hard road. But in the middle of all of that, in the middle of Moses going in the opposite direction, really in the middle of the desert of his life, God shows up. So real quick, before we go any further, this is a great life lesson. Push pause on the story and understand. In God's story, and this is about God's story, failure is only final when you give up. Failure is only final in God's story. Remember, he's invited us into his story. It's not about you. It's not about me. It's his story. We're living in it. He invites us to be in it. And when you and I mess up, we go in the opposite direction. God will always give a way back. Failure is not final because of this biblical truth. Forgiveness and the new path is only a whisper of repentance away. It's only a whisper of repentance away. So God doesn't give up on you. I want everyone to hear me. No matter where you find yourself today, and you feel like maybe you've wandered way too far off, God's not giving up. Failure is not final. Don't give up on yourself. Not because of you, but because of God's story and what he wants to do in your life. Verse 4. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called out to him from the bush, Moses, Moses, here I am. Moses answered, here I am, he answered. If you know the story, Moses is out there, the bush is burning. As Moses comes closer, God calls out to him. Moses says, here I am. And then God says, listen, I want you to stop. I want you to stop. As a matter of fact, I want you to take off your sandals because the ground that you're on is holy ground. Why was it holy? Well, it was holy because God's presence is there. It's also holy because this is the place where Moses is now going to meet God. This is the place where God is going to get Moses' attention, and it's holy because God's there. It's holy because in the middle of this moment, Moses must choose. Just like us, God sometimes will do incredible things to get you to stop, to pay attention, and in that moment, many times it's a holy moment. Many times it's at a moment like this at the end of a service. It can be anywhere, anytime, but it's a holy moment where God has caught your attention, and now he's going to speak to you. He's speaking to Moses, and now Moses is going to have a choice. He is in the presence of God. And as he takes off his sandals, as he now hears the voice of God, he now begins to understand this is something very peculiar. God is speaking to him through this burning bush. He's taken his sandals off. It's holy ground. And now God is going to have a call. He's going to give Moses a choice. And God says, I've heard the cries of my people. I've heard the cries of your people. And even though you're not getting beaten, even though your kids aren't being thrown in the river, even though they're not being abused, my people, your people, they are. So Moses, in this holy moment, I've got your attention. I am calling you to be my instrument of delivery, my instrument of salvation for my people. Incredible again, as we push pause, to see this lesson that Moses is now hearing. And it is this: God uses willing people to fulfill his plan. This must be stressed. It is the story of God. Everything is. But God's going to use his people to complete his story and his plan. Listen, God could have just said, I've heard the cries of my people. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to zap Pharaoh. I'm going to kill all the Egyptians. As a matter of fact, I'm going to give my people magic carpets, and they're going to fly away over the river and go to the promised land. Could God have done that? Yes. Is that how God works? No. God uses his people when they accept the call, when they're willing to be used. And we have to understand that, we have to stress this. It is the call that God gives to all of us for specific things. That Bible study that needs to be started at your work, that you know maybe God's calling you to do. Maybe that Bible study Christian group at your school. God's will, God's story will always use people. Here at Team Church, our kids' ministries are booming. Middle school and student ministries are booming. And God will call people, and it will only be fulfilled through people. This is how it always works. Your neighbor who's just grumpy, your neighbor who's a pain, your neighbor who you know is not a Christian because he tells you all the time, who's going to share the love of God with him or her? Nexus. Who's going to do it? Could God just drop the money? Sure, he could. It doesn't work that way. None of God's story works that way. This is what Moses is now beginning to understand. As he's standing in front of this burning bush that's not being consumed, he's taken off his sandals. And now he has the call of God in his life. I told you last week, I believe Moses, while growing up in the big house with Pharaoh, he knew who his parents were. He knew he wasn't supposed to be there. He knew all of these things. I think he had his calling long before this dramatic point. I think this is a dramatic point because this is Moses' last chance. And God has come and said, failure is not final. Your path has not been where I wanted you to go, but now you can re-engage in the story. Verse 11. But Moses asked God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Now, I want to make sure that I say this is my opinion. I don't think this is humility on Moses' part. I've read the story. I've studied it in Hebrew. I think this is the beginning, the start of Moses really understanding what God's asking. And he doesn't really want to do it. And it's stemming from a lack of self-confidence, maybe. It's also stemming from the fact that he knows he's been doing nothing for 40 years while his people have been being abused. Maybe he feels like a failure. Maybe he doesn't feel like he could do it. But I don't think this is a sense of good humility. Oh, who am I? I think it's no, who am I? I don't really want to do this. The call of who am I? Through this series, it just begs for some parenting timeouts. You know, I believe that parents have an incredible call of God. So I want to give you a parenting timeout for those of us who are parents or want to be parents. Listen, the cry of every child and teenager from their heart is, who am I? And the role of every parent and grandparent or guardian is to answer that in a biblical way. Your kids naturally, especially in those younger days, those middle school years, they cry out in a lack of confidence. Who am I? And as a parent, your role is to come along and show them biblically you are loved and created by God. And everything that you are has been given to you by God. So you and yourself, you're not special. Oh, but because God has made you. And as you give your life over to his story, then you are special. You are unique. God knows every hair on your head. And we help them to understand God doesn't make any mistakes. And we live in a culture now where we're pushing these kids in all kinds of directions. Friends, we got to take them back to the Bible, back to scriptures, and answer that question, who am I? Also, I got a little shameless plug here. In October, I'm going to be leading a 4-week parenting home team class. It'll meet here on Wednesday night, so first grade through 12th grade is taken care of. And I'll be leading this parenting class, just walking through these things to make sure that we're creating kids who are confident in Christ, that they see they have value, but you help them train to be self-confident and self-motivated and biblically informed so that they be all that God's created them to be. So yes, accept who you are, but then you be all that you can be. You be great for who God has created you. It's an incredible 4-week series class. I would encourage you to be there. Verse 13 through 14. Then Moses asked God. In a sense, Moses is like, if I were to go, if I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What should I tell them? Again, I think this is Moses saying, listen, God, this is an incredible experience here, but I left. These people have probably forgotten who I am, and just telling you, if they're still being abused, they may have forgotten who you are. I have no credibility. How do I convince them that I'm on your mission and that you are the reason it will work out? Verse 14, God replied to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. Now, much has been written theologically about this name, this phrase. It's a Hebrew alphabet wordplay that would spell out the word Yahweh, but it's a very intimate term. It's seen to be very intimate for God, the Lord, in Hebrew. There is this sense because he says, I am the God of Abraham, of Isaac. I'm the God that you tell them that keeps his promises. This word means this idea of I'm the self-existent one. I have always been. I have always, will always be. I'm close. I'm intimate. I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I know nation of Hebrew. I know you've been abused. I know that you feel like I haven't been there. But I want you to listen to Moses, and he is coming in my name. I know the pain. I am the self-existed one. I have always been. I will always be. He's just saying, listen, Moses, I got it covered. You go tell them that you are now working for me. I'm going to engage. We talked about last week. I'm going to intervene into their life. I have heard their cries. And at this point, we're thinking Moses is like, awesome. I've seen a burning bush. I've heard this voice. This harkens me back to my days back in the big house. God's back going to use me. All right, God, let's go. Not so fast. Chapter 4. Moses answered, what if they don't believe me and will not obey me, but say, the Lord did not appear to you? The Lord asked him, what is that in your hand? And Moses looks at his staff and he says, a staff. This is an incredible story. It makes for a great movie. That's why there's been so many movies made about it. He has his staff, and God says to Moses, throw down the staff. Throws it down, poof, comes a snake. Moses pick up the snake by the tail. And everybody knows you don't pick up snakes. But Moses is now being tested in this sense of obeying in faith. So as he picks up the snake, goes back to a staff. Oh, that's good. Moses, stick your hand in your vest. Sticks it in, pulls it out. It's a leprosy type of thing. Moses would know his skin just completely changed. He's like, are you kidding me right now? Moses stick it back in, pulls it back out, and it's healed. Now there's this idea of obeying out of desperation. So Moses, I'm showing you, you're going to have to move through your fear and obey through faith. You're going to have to also obey out of desperation. So Moses, I am with you. I'm going to be using you. God can use the ordinary things of your life and my life in extraordinary ways when you and I obey his call. God can use us, ordinary people, in extraordinary ways if we will just trust and obey. I grew up singing, because there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. It's a great old hymn. This is what Moses is learning. Moses is going to learn that his what if needs to move to the what is. Well, what if this happens? What if this happens? We don't know what the market's going to do. What if this happens? What if? No. You move. You move from what if to what is. Moses, what do you have that I can use? That staff in your hand, that faith, that obedience. You see, the what ifs of our life are focused on our abilities. That's what we see Moses doing here. I've been for 40 years doing this. I've been cast out. So God, I know you want to use me. I'm just not sure if I'm usable. What if focuses on our abilities? What is focused on what God has given us and what he can do with us if we obey? I want you to think about that. What has God given you? What's in your hand that you maybe think is just a normal, everyday, not really extraordinary deal? Could be your gifts, could be your passions, could be your resources, could be your intellect, could be your time, could be lots of things. What has God given you that maybe he will ask you to use for him? And all he's saying is, move in faith, trust and obey, and think about what is. What am I saying to you? What have I given to you that all you got to do is use it? Listen, God will never call you or me. He's not calling Moses to something that he won't use his power through you. When God gives you a call and tells you to move, we need to move. Verse 10. But Moses replied to the Lord, please, Lord, I have never been eloquent, either in the past or recently or since you have been speaking to your servant, because my mouth and my tongue, they're sluggish. Verse 11, the Lord said to him, who placed the mouth on humans? Who makes a person mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will help you speak, and I will teach you what to say. You could tell the Lord's getting a little frustrated because Moses doesn't want to do it. This is not a humility thing. I don't even think it's a speaking thing. He was trained in the best schools, but even if it was, God said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use you. Moses said, please, Lord, send someone else. After seeing all of God's power, he still didn't want to go. Please, Lord, send someone else. Please, Lord, I know middle schoolers need help. Send somebody else. Lord, I know we have an all-volunteer band. We don't pay people to gig out here on Sunday morning. Please, I love music, but send somebody else. We go on and on. This is what Moses is doing. Now, if we look at the panoramic view of Moses, remember, we're going to pull out from maybe the story we think we know. Why is Moses saying, please, Lord, send somebody else? I think he's wondering, Lord, don't you know those people don't like me? Forget the Egyptians. They don't like anybody who's not like them. Your people, my people, they don't like me. I left. Also, and I think this is a huge part of it, please, Lord, send somebody else. Don't you know I have a wife and kids now? I mean, I'm doing really well here. I'm making good money. I got a family. I mean, it's the desert. Nobody really wants to live in the desert, but what we got's pretty good. I got some good things. Please, Lord, send somebody else. I don't want to go die for you. I don't want to die for the cause. I can't even remember those people. And just to be honest with you, God, I'm sure they're having some pain. I'm sure it's not going well for them, but I'm actually not in any pain at all. My life couldn't be any better. Please, Lord, send somebody else. I don't know if I want to give up. I don't know if I want to give up what I've got to do what you're asking me to do. I like my safety. I like my security. I like my home. And I kind of think if I go back, my people may kill me. And if they don't, Pharaoh will. Please, Lord, send someone else. I don't want to go. Verse 14. This wasn't in the Sunday school material when I was growing up. Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, "Isn't Aaron the Levite your brother? I know that he can speak well, and also he is on his way now to meet you. He will rejoice when he sees you." Everybody focuses on that part. I think we need to focus on the other part. Then the Lord's anger burned. God uses people, willing people, people who will be willing to sacrifice, people who understand the mission. And he's got this attention now. Moses, come on, man. You picked up the staff, you put your hand in. I mean, how much more do you know to know that I am with you? No, please, somebody else. The Lord's anger burned against him. God knew Moses was speaking more out of disobedience than humility. He was speaking more out of disobedience by this point than I believe even fear. God, I hear you. Yeah, I'm not doing that. Have we ever done that? God, I know what you want me to do. I know what you've gifted me to do. Yeah, I'm not in. Just not going to do that. When it comes to God's call, here's what we need to understand. God's call is a command, not an invitation. Let that sink in. When you know God is calling, you know it's what God wants you to do. He's not giving you an invitation. Well, if you got time, if you feel like you can. This is a call of God. This is Moses being called to do something incredible, to be a part of God's story. And he is fighting against it. We have tried to make the story more about Moses. I don't speak well. I think he's scared. I don't think he wants to give up what he's got. I think he thinks he's going to die when he gets there. Let me ask you a question. It's easy to hear these stories. What is God calling you to do? Some of you say, I don't even know. It could be because you haven't asked. You haven't been reading through the scriptures. You haven't been praying. You haven't been looking at what God is doing around you in the community, in your neighborhood, in your work, at your local church. I love 2 Chronicles 16:9. It says, "For the eyes of the Lord range throughout the earth to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to him." I read that verse many, many years ago for the first time and really understanding what it meant. As a freshman in college, I'd given my life into ministry as best as you could understand that as an 18-year-old. But when I read this verse, at the time when I was reading it, there was no burning bush that wasn't being consumed. I didn't get the audible voice of God. That'd be awesome. Didn't happen. But as I was reading through it, I absolutely knew in that moment in time that I was standing on holy ground. That God had gotten my attention. And now he was giving me a choice. What are you going to do with this call? And I read this verse, and I heard someone speaking on it. It was on a Sunday morning. I left by myself. I thought about this verse. I thought about what the person said about the verse, which is basically that the Lord is on the stage or the banisters of heaven. And you've heard me use this before because it's a life verse for me. And he's looking back and forth, back and forth. Who's going to answer the call? Whose heart will be fully committed so that, the verse says here, the eyes of the Lord range through and fro, goes back and forth, to strengthen whose hearts are fully committed. Who wants God to strengthen the staff in your hand? Who wants God to strengthen those gifts, those abilities, those resources, those passions, whatever it may be? The Lord is looking for people who are fully committed. That's Moses. Moses, you've been wandering. Moses, I set you up. I put you in the big house with all the great training, with all the stuff. You kind of went over here. 40 years later, there's still a problem over here, Moses. You in? Are you going to worry about your inadequacies? You're going to worry about your family? Well, shouldn't we worry about our family? Yes, you should, unless God says to do something and he'll take care of your family. What are you going to do? Now, many of us, we look and we ask the same question that Moses looks, who am I? So many of us, I ask you the question, who are you? Who are you? As you come in today, maybe a first-time guest, maybe you've been coming here for 25 years. Who are you? It's a great question, but as Moses is going to find out, he needs to stop looking at himself. Who am I? My gifts? My passions? My setting in life? Who? He stopped looking at who I am, who are you, and start asking the question, whose are you? Whose? God said, I am. Moses said, yeah, but who am I? Wrong question. I am, and you are mine. And my story I'm inviting you into. Whose are you? In her personal memoir, written many years ago, about life many years ago, the book called The Whisper Test, Mary Ann Bird shares an amazing story of the power in knowing whose you are. Mary Ann was born with multiple visible birth defects. As a child, she suffered not only her physical impairments, but emotional damage from how she felt she was viewed by others. She writes in her memoir, I grew up knowing I was different, and I hated it. I was born with a cleft palate, and when I started to go to school, my classmates, who were constantly teasing, made it clear to me how I must look to others. A little girl with a misshapen lip, crooked nose, lopsided teeth, and hollow and somewhat gargled speech. When my schoolmates asked, what happened to your lip? I'd tell them that I'd fallen as a baby and cut it on a piece of glass. Somehow it seemed more acceptable to have suffered an accident than to have been born different. By the age of 7, I was convinced that no one outside my own family could ever love me or even like me. And then I entered 2nd grade in Miss Leonard's class. I never knew what her first name was. It was just Miss Leonard. She was round and pretty and had a fragrance about her, with chubby arms and a shiny brown hair and warm dark eyes that smiled even on the rare occasions when her mouth didn't. Everyone adored her, but no one came to love her more than I did, and for a very special reason, she writes. The time came for the annual hearing test given at our school. I was barely able to hear anything out of one ear and was not about to reveal yet another problem that would single me out as being different. So I cheated. I had learned to watch other children, and I raised my hand when they did during the group testing. The whisper test, however, required a different kind of deception. You see, each child would go to the door of the classroom, turn sideways, close one ear with a finger, and the teacher would whisper something from her desk, which the child would repeat. Then the same thing was done for the other ear. I had discovered in kindergarten during the whisper test that nobody checked to see how tightly the untested ear was being covered, so I merely pretended to block mine. As usual, I was last. But all through the testing, I wondered, what Miss Leonard might say to me. I knew from previous years and listening that she whispered things like, "The sky is blue," or "Do you have new shoes?" My turn came up. I turned my bad ear to her, plugging on the other side solidly with my finger, then gently backed my finger out enough to be able to be heard. I waited, and then the words that God had surely put into her mouth, 7 words that changed my life forever. Miss Leonard, the pretty, fragrant teacher I adored, said softly, "I wish you were my little girl." And everything changed. You see, we're focusing way too much on who I am, and not whose I am. We can sing the great I am, but if we don't understand that the great I am whispers to us, "You are my little girl. You are my little boy. And I have called you to great things. But you must trust and obey. You must understand who I am, so that you can be confident in whose you are. And when you know whose you are, as we will see with Moses next week, you leave the holy place. You leave the place of God asking a question and giving you a challenge, and you leave there different. Not because you've even done anything, but because you answered the question. Who's going to go? Will you obey this command?